My name is Jack Mercer, and I have made a lot of bad decisions in my life. Signing a 6-month contract to work as a maintenance engineer on a Telvari deep space research station was, by most reasonable measures, one of them. The Telvari were brilliant scientists. They were also, by every metric I had encountered in my first week, completely convinced that humans were the most fragile and least reliable species in the known galaxy. Their station commander made this opinion clear on my first morning. Her name was Voss Aaron, and she was tall even by Telvari standards, with silver-gray skin and pale eyes that held the particular look of someone who had already calculated the outcome of a situation and was simply waiting for it to arrive. She met me at the docking bay with a data tablet and an expression that I would later learn was as warm as she got. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then she looked at the tablet, then back at me. Human, she said. Maintenance engineer. No prior deep space station experience. Plenty of ship experience, I said. 6 years on cargo haulers, 3 on a deep space research vessel. I know how things break and I know how to fix them. This station operates at the outer edge of the Dravosi belt, she said. Radiation levels, gravitational variance, and temperature fluctuations here exceed the tolerances listed in most human biological assessments. I read the briefing, I said. Did you understand it? I understood it well enough to sign the contract, I said. She looked at me again with those pale eyes, and I had the distinct feeling of being assessed and filed under a category she had already prepared. Most non-Telvari contractors who take this posting last between 2 and 4 weeks, she said. The record for a human is 19 days. Who held that record? I asked. A maintenance engineer, she said. He cited the isolation, the workload, and the gravitational variance as reasons for early termination. What was wrong with him? I said. Something moved briefly in her expression. She turned and walked toward the interior of the station. Without another word, and I picked up my bag and followed, because that was apparently how orientation worked here. The station was extraordinary. I had worked on research vessels before, but nothing like this. It sat at the precise gravitational midpoint between 2 massive bodies in the Dravosi belt, which meant it experienced constant low-level fluctuation that you felt in your feet and your inner ear and your back after a long shift. The radiation shielding was the most advanced I had ever seen, but the station was also the oldest I had ever worked on. And old shielding meant constant monitoring, and constant maintenance, and the particular kind of problem-solving that required equal parts engineering knowledge and creative thinking. I loved it immediately. My quarters were small and the bunk was built for Telvari proportions, which meant my feet hung off the end, and the common area where the crew ate was always slightly too cold by human preference, and the gravitational variance gave me headaches for the first 2 weeks until my body adjusted. None of that mattered because the work was extraordinary. Every system on that station was a puzzle, and the puzzles were the kind that changed slightly every day, because the environment changed every day. The radiation shielding needed constant recalibration. The structural integrity systems responded to the gravitational variance in ways that required attention that no automated system could fully provide. The power grid had been patched and modified over 40 years of operation until it was a layered architecture that only made sense if you understood all 40 years of decisions that had built it. I started learning it from the beginning. I spent my first 2 weeks following every system from origin to endpoint, tracing every modification, reading every maintenance log going back to the station's construction. The Telvari engineers watched me with polite curiosity that slowly shifted into something else as they realized I was not just getting familiar with the work, but genuinely understanding the station at a level that took most engineers months. Voss Aaron said nothing about this directly, but she stopped looking at me like I was a problem she was waiting to arrive. The first real crisis came on day 23. A gravitational spike, larger than any in the station's recorded history, hit the port side structural grid at 2 in the morning station time. The automated response system handled the first 30 seconds correctly and then made a decision based on incomplete data that would have cascaded into a full structural failure in the port research wing within 4 minutes. I was already in the maintenance corridor when the alarm sounded, because the low-level fluctuations in my bunk had felt different that night, and I had not been able to sleep and had gone to check the monitoring systems out of habit. I overrode the automated response manually, rerouted the structural load through 2 secondary systems that had never been used in combination before, but which I had spent 3 days studying the previous week, because the idea had occurred to me, and I wanted to understand if it was possible. It was possible. The spike passed. The port research wing held. The monitoring system logged the event, and my response, and the outcome, And by morning, the entire engineering staff had read the log. The chief engineer, a quiet Telvari, named Orval, who had been on the station for 12 years and had never said more than 6 words to me at one time, stopped me in the corridor that afternoon. He looked at the maintenance log in his hand and then at me. The secondary reroute, he said. You planned this in advance. I thought about it, I said. I did not plan it exactly. I just knew it was possible if the situation called for it. He was quiet for a moment. No one had considered that combination before, he said. I had a lot of time to read the logs, I said. He nodded once, slowly, and walked away. That was Orval's version of a standing ovation, I later learned. Voss Aaron found me that evening in the observation bay, which was the only place on the station where the viewport was large enough to see the full sweep of the Dravosi Belt, all that dark rock and cold light hanging in the deep black. I went there sometimes after long shifts because the scale of it put everything else in perspective. She stood beside me and looked out at the belt for a while without speaking. Day 23, she said finally. Still here, I said. The port wing response, she said. Walk me through your thinking. I walked her through it the same way I'd explained it in the log, but in more detail, because she asked the right questions and the right questions deserved proper answers. She listened without interrupting, which I had learned was the highest form of attention a Telvari commander offered. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. You read 40 years of maintenance logs in 2 weeks? She said. I had trouble sleeping, I said. Why? The gravitational variance, I said. My body was adjusting. Most contractors find that a reason to leave, she said. I found it a reason to leave, she said. I found it a reason to read logs, I said. She looked at me with those pale eyes, and for the first time since I had arrived, the assessment in them was not about how long I would last. The previous human contractor, she said slowly, the 19 days, what about him? I said. He said the isolation was the hardest part, she said. The isolation does not bother me, I said honestly. I have been alone in deep space for 6 years. You stop feeling isolated when the work is interesting enough. And this work is interesting enough, she said. It was not quite a question. This work is the most interesting I've ever done, I said. She looked back at the belt, and I caught something in her profile that I had not seen there before, something that might, in better light, have been called satisfaction. 3 months passed. I fixed things that had been broken for years because everyone had assumed they were simply the way they were. I found solutions that the automated systems had never considered because the automated systems only knew what they had been taught, and I had the particular human habit of asking what would happen if you tried something that had never been tried. I learned the station the way you learn something you have decided to understand completely, not just well enough. Orval started saving me a seat in the engineering briefings. The rest of the crew stopped treating me like a visitor waiting to leave. And Voss Aaron, who had looked at me on my first morning with the calm certainty of someone who had already calculated the outcome, started stopping by the observation bay in the evenings with 2 cups of something warm that the Telvari drank after long shifts and which tasted, to my human palate, like complicated wood. I drank it anyway because it was company, and because the conversations that went with it were the best part of my day. One evening, 4 months in, she sat down beside me with the cups and looked out at the belt for a long time before she spoke. When you arrived, she said, I estimated 3 days. I heard it was usually 2 to 4 weeks, I said. For others, she said. For you, I thought 3 days. Why 3 days specifically? I said. Because you smiled when I told you the conditions, she said. And in my experience, the ones who smile at the difficult thing either leave very quickly or stay forever. I looked at her. Which did you think I would do? I said. She looked back at me, and those pale eyes were warm in a way that had nothing to do with assessment. I was not sure, she said. That was the interesting part. Outside the viewport, the Dravosi Belt moved in its slow, ancient way, all that cold rock and deep light, indifferent and endless and completely extraordinary, if you took the time to look at it properly. I picked up my cup of complicated wood and thought about 6 years of cargo routes and 3 months on the most interesting station I had ever worked on, and the particular look in a Telvari commander's eyes that meant she had calculated something and found the answer. Surprising. For what it is worth, I said, I am planning to renew the contract. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said simply. How? I said, because you are still reading logs, she said. You finished the 40-year archive 2 months ago. Last week, Orval told me you started on the original construction documentation. There is a lot I still do not understand, I said. Yes, she said, and there was something in her voice that was quiet and certain and genuine. There is. We sat together in the observation bay while the belt moved outside, and the station held its position at the precise midpoint between two massive bodies, balanced and steady and built to last, and I thought that was a pretty good description of most things worth keeping.